Melanie Douglas stood at the counter inside Gray's bookshop, propped up by the cash register, shifting her dark eyes to a pamphlet in the store owner's hands. She dropped her chin into her curled hand and grinned at her friend. Julia had dark ringlets of hair that swayed over her hips when she walked. Her eyes were a deep brown, a hint of maroon undertone playing in their depths when the sun hit them just right. They'd been friends since grade school, shared secrets and holidays and recipes. But Julia had always been troubled by dreams, a torment she'd battled as long as Melanie had known her. "Romania?" Melanie asked, reading the back of the brochure in her friend's hands. "Jules, you're not really going to Romania." "Not this moment," Julia shook her head. "But someday, in a few years, when I have the shop running right and have some money saved." Melanie pursed her lips and gave her friend a wry grin. "This has something to do with that dream of yours, doesn't it?" "Ugh," Julia scoffed. "I'm gonna have to go to Romania just to put this whole thing out of my head." "Think it'll work?" Melanie wondered. "If it doesn't, I'll see a shrink when I get back." Melanie laughed quietly and turned her eyes to her brother's shape as he shuffled along the fronts of the bookcases. Jacob was tall and thick, his shoulders wide and hands rough from hard work that other boys his age had never known. His shaved head shined under the fluorescent lights as he eyed the rows of books. "We cannot be getting this old," Julia said. "I can't believe he's 18. Melanie wrinkled her nose. "Old? He's only 6 years younger than us. We're not old. You know he likes you, right?" Julia cut her a sideways glance. "He's 18. He likes every female he lays eyes on," she droned. "Dude, you find anything you like the looks of?" she asked. Jacob turned a shy smile her way and glanced down at a slender book in his hands. "This one looks interesting," he said. "The Mysteries of Athens Undercity." "What?" Melanie frowned. "It's actually really good," Julia assured her. "Written by a local pair of sisters that live just a few miles from here. They claim that an ancestor of theirs found older tunnels under Athens that shoot off from the Prohibition tunnels. You know, the ones that run under the courthouse." Melanie stared at her for a moment before she turned her gaze back to her brother. "Wait, I thought you liked archaeology," she said. "Digging in the dirt and grave robbing and all that." "Mrs. like digging in the dirt," Jacob shrugged. "And it's all right here under our feet." "That's cool, right?" Melanie looked back to Julia, not at all comforted by her friend's smile. "Very cool," Julia agreed with him. "Tell you what, why don't you just take that one? We'll call it a late birthday present." "Jules," Melanie shook her head. "My store, my rules," Julia cut her off. "Happy birthday, dude." "Thanks, Miss G," Jacob beamed, flipping through the pages. "You're welcome," she grinned back at him. "You're never going to make any money this way," Melanie told her. "Giving your stock away, that's just bad business." "It's one book, Melanie, not the whole store. Besides, nobody ever buys that one. It's just been cluttering up my shelves. The reason I'm not making money has nothing to do with sales practices anyway. It's the hours." "Yeah?" Melanie cocked an eyebrow. "How you going to fix that?" "I'm hiring a helper," Julia said matter-of-factly. "He's got an appointment here in just a few minutes. Can't wait to meet him. He wants to rent the apartment, too. Twice the income. How's that for good business?" Melanie blinked at her. "You're gonna let him live next door? Doesn't that seem, I don't know, weird?" "Most people don't get to pick their neighbors," Julia pointed out. "I not only get to pick mine, I get to charge him rent." The front door opened, and the little shop bell tinkled softly to announce the arrival of a potential customer. The man who walked through the door was tall and well-made, athletic-looking, sporting a great smile. He had wide shoulders, was slim through the hips. He had a swath of straight black hair neatly trimmed along his collar, deep dark eyes that glittered under the can lights. A bit of stubble along his strong jaw gave him a rugged charm. He wore well-fitting jeans, work boots, and a medium gray t-shirt under an unbuttoned blue flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He flashed them both a smile as he approached the counter. "Ladies," he tipped his head. "My name is David Richter. I'm here about a job interview and to see a flat." He had the remnants of a dwindling British accent that caught Melanie off guard, and she turned a grin to Julia. "I'll let you get back to your business," she said. "I'll talk to you later." When she reached the door, Melanie turned another grin back to Julia, biting her lip between her teeth, the universal "he's hot" sign that made Julia smile. "Thanks again, Miss G," Jacob said, holding up his new book. "Happy birthday, Jacob." "He seems a nice kid," David said with a charming smile. Says something about him that he enjoys getting a book for his birthday. Julia agreed with a nod and reached across the counter to shake his hand. I'm easy to get along with, Mr. Richter, she told him. I'm not a slave driver. I just need you to help me keep the shelves neat and well-stocked, make sure nobody steals the merchandise, and be honest. Other than that, I don't really have any other requirements. This is the best deal I've heard in years, he said. I think we get on just fine, Miss Gray. Jacob walked along at his sister's side, his new book open, eyes glued to the pages. There's maps in here, he said with wonder. They're not real good, but with some work you could figure them out. Melanie put her hand on Jacob's shoulder and shoved him off the sidewalk with a grin. Planning on looking for the tunnels? She asked. Jacob gave her a deer-in-the-headlights sort of look, rubbing the back of his head as he searched for words. Melanie only shook her head and stepped off the curb to get into her car. It's nothing I haven't already done, she told him. Just be careful and be smart. Take flashlights and basic first aid kits and all that good stuff, okay? And call me if you get into trouble. Got it? Jacob blinked at her over the roof of her car, his slow smile spreading. Thanks, sis. I won't be late, I promise. Uh-huh. Midnight. No later. You got it, mister? You're the best, he said, spinning on his heel to go and meet his friends. Yeah, Melanie sighed, watching him vanish. The best. Jacob trotted along the sidewalk, around the old square, making his way to the Wee Hours Diner, where he and his friends were supposed to meet up later. He found them all there waiting for him, sitting in a crowded booth, chatting a bit too loudly. No, Kevin, Brian chided. There are never more than 2 Sith Lords at the same time. I can't let you both play one. So let one of us be the Sith Lord and the other... Wait. Rachel cut Kevin off. Sith Lords? Are you kidding me? I thought I was going to play a Mando. Brian dropped his head into his hands and groaned. It's already a super-powered game, guys. I can't let everybody be a 20th level character, you know? I'm gonna rip your thumbs off, Brian, Rachel warned, pointing a finger at him as she narrowed her hazel gaze. The last time we played, it was D&D, and I got the short end of the stick. You let Jacob play the super cleric, the one who had the god in his corner, and Kevin was the dragon rider. Me? I was just a rogue who couldn't get a word in edgewise because I was traveling with Yakov and Shmakov. Rach, Brian sighed. I didn't say you couldn't play a Mando. Well, this sounds serious, Jacob grinned as he dropped into the booth beside Brian. Glad I got here before the bloodshed started. I am not getting the shaft again, Rachel told him. Not this time. Give me the Mando gear or I walk. Technically, we don't need you, Brian said. I can run for 2. Brian, Kevin snapped, leveling his friend with a dark stare. You're being a jerk. Jacob, Brian muttered, would you explain to Rachel I'm not trying to run the game for her? I think she can hear you, Jacob pointed out. You're the game master. It's your job to work out all the problems. That is super helpful, Jacob. Thank you, Brian said with a saccharine grin. This is supposed to be a game session for your birthday. Do you remember asking me to do this for your birthday? Because I remember you asking me to do this. Actually, I have a better idea, Jacob said, a slow smile turning the corners of his mouth. I think we should go look for the Lost City. They all stared at him blankly. Okay, Kevin said. I'll bite. What lost city would that be, Jacob? The one right under our feet, Jacob told him. And I've got a map. He dropped the book on the table and slid it to the middle so they could all get a good look. Brian cocked an eyebrow at him but said nothing. Rachel shook her head. Kevin grinned. I'm game, Kevin said coolly. Let's go find us a lost city. No, Rachel shook her head. What are we, 5-year-olds? This junk isn't real, Jacob. Then what's the harm in going to look for it? Kevin asked. It's just an adventure. You wanted an adventure, right? How about one in real life? No character sheets, no dice. I've got till midnight, Jacob told them, and that's plenty of time to get down there and check it out. How are we going to get down there? Brian asked. There's only, 3 doors to the Prohibition tunnels, and they're all in businesses. Wrong, Jacob grinned. There's another way. 2 ways, actually, but one is pretty close. We can walk. Don't we need flashlights? Rachel asked. Rope? Chalk? This isn't a D&D game, Brian huffed. You don't need all that crap. Actually, dude, Kevin nodded, we kinda do. Look, Jacob said, dragging the book back across the table. You guys go home, get your stuff, and meet me at the Memory Walk Park in an hour, and we'll leave from there. Rachel heaved a sigh, her eyes uncertain. I don't think we should do this, she said quietly. I got a bad feeling about it. Geez, you're the biggest fangirl I've ever seen, Brian said, sliding out of the booth. I will see you guys in an hour. I'll give you a ride home, Rachel, Kevin offered, so you can get your things. She only nodded meekly, but followed him out of the coffee shop. Within the hour, they were all gathered around the monument at the Memorial Walk. Obelisks stood in honor of military service, the names of hometown heroes chiseled in the granite. In the bright sunshine of a late June day, they were gleaming white and glossy. The park was beautiful, filled with singing birds and the sound of a small stream nearby. They all chatted quietly as they followed Jacob through the park, shifting their backpacks as they slipped further into the trees. When the path ended and doubled back toward the entrance of the park, Jacob stopped and pulled a book from the waist of his jeans. "It's through here," he said. "We cross the stream and go over the ridge. There's a house on the other side, at the foot of the hill. There's an old sewer access tunnel that used to run off from the asylum. Down there, we'll find the entrance." "Asylum?" Kevin cocked an eyebrow. "Dude, we should so check that out." "It's gone," Jacob said with a shrug. "It was torn down in 1913. "I still say this is a bad idea," Rachel said, but her tone was a little less convincing than it had been before. "Caving is super dangerous." "We're not going caving, Rachel," Kevin grinned. "We're going sloshing through old sewers." "That sounds so much better," she said. They pushed through the overgrown perimeter of the park and began their trek into the tangled woods beyond. It was a strange place, almost a sprawl of wilderness that had existed just beyond their sight for the whole of their lives, and they'd never known about it. It felt like an expedition into some undiscovered country, a stretch of shadowy forest hung with ivy, shrouded in a fog that had no place in the heat of summer. They picked their way through the undergrowth and between the sagging limbs of old trees for more than an hour, until Jacob brought them all to a halt and pointed down into the hollow. "There is what's left of Whispering Pines Sanatorium, guys," he said with a broad smile. Nothing remained but an L-shaped skeletal structure of leaning brick, swathed in a thick growth of kudzu and ivy. There were 2 open doorways and 4 gaping holes where windows had once been. A single chimney stood tall and straight, oddly strong amid the crumbling remains. The stone foundation sagged, the whole of the structure seeming to sink slowly into the bottom of the hollow over the decades. Black ash discolored the mortar, and rain-washed stains of soot streaked the brick facade. It housed only 93 inmates at its highest capacity, Jacob told them, glancing at the book while they gathered around the foundation. It was hidden back here in the woods to keep the sick and mentally ill out of sight. They all stood at the base of the old chimney, their eyes climbing its great height into the canopy overhead. "It was built in 1985, he read. Designed to be a tuberculosis ward, but it also housed the mentally ill. From the Whispering Pines opening date in September of 1856 to the time it burned in June of 1913, more than 400 people had been subjected to terrible living conditions and cruel treatment here." Rachel swallowed hard, her eyes a bit misty. "That's sad," she said. "The sad thing is that 170 of the inmates who lived here died questionable deaths. They never left this place. They had no family to claim their bodies, and they were buried on the grounds without grave markers." What?" Rachel asked, turning her eyes up to Jacob's. "Wait," Kevin scoffed. "You mean we could be standing on dead people right now?" Jacob nodded. It's possible. I think most of them were buried on the north side of the structure, and he flipped a few pages. That's where we are right now." Rachel wrapped her arms around herself and let her eyes move over the leaf litter at her feet. Kevin shook his head and turned away. "That's just sick, man." "I think it's pretty cool," Brian said. "We have a potential paranormal hotspot right here in little old Athens. I mean, suffering, mental illness, tragic death, burial without recognition. Those are great ways to get ghosties lingering around." Rachel wrinkled her nose at him. "Not cool, dude," Kevin muttered. "The real tragedy was in a fire of 1913, Jacob said. No fire codes back then. Inmates were locked in their cells, some of them shackled to walls because they were dangerous. The fire started in the kitchen, spread through the whole asylum. They all died, all of them. 92 souls perished in the fire on a June night." "Tammy, that's what the book says," he said, flipping another page. "All of them?" Rachel asked, her eyes wide. "Bull crap," Kevin shook his head. "They had to have been able to get somebody out of there. Fire doesn't spread that fast." "You're right," Jacob said. "Fire doesn't spread that fast. But that's what the book says. I mean, they should have been able to get someone out. There was this really big scandal for a long time. Nobody knew why they had all burned. The resident doctor was a Dr. Thomas Worth. He was a really well-respected medical man. He just vanished, and there was no one to hold accountable. What about the staff? Brian asked, popping a stick of gum into his mouth. They got out, right? Jacob shook his head, glancing at the pages. No. I mean, it says nobody got out. No doctors, no nurses, no kitchen staff, no orderlies, nobody. You're so full of it, Kevin said, turning away. And we are wasting daylight. Let's go. Jacob grinned and fell into step beside him. It's not crap, dude. I'm serious. It really happened. I'm reading it from this book. How does an entire building burn down and nobody gets out alive? Kevin asked. I don't think it's possible. At least one person could have staggered out of there. It's a good question, Jacob said, but the fact remains that, according to this documentation, nobody got out alive. Say what you want, but I'm not buying it, Kevin told him. Jacob shrugged. Suit yourself. The access should be right around here somewhere, he said, kicking at the leaves. They all joined him on the lip of the access shaft, staring down into the deep black hole that seemed to swallow the ladder. I'm not going down there, Rachel said. That's nasty. What part of sewer access tunnel were you expecting to not be nasty? Kevin asked. It won't kill you. Come on, it'll be fun. She's scared to run her pretty pink little shoes, Brian scoffed, or her little purple backpack. What is your problem with me, Brian? She snapped. Ever since you guys let me play that first game with you, you have made my life miserable. She got a point, Kevin nodded. You have been a douchebag, dude. I thought you wanted to be one of the boys, Brian shrugged, dark eyes innocent. We pick on each other, like, all the time. It's what we do. Lay off, Jacob said with a sigh. I'm going down there. Are you guys coming? Yep, Kevin nodded, circling the ladder, not looking back. Rachel watched them descend the ladder into the dark. Not until she saw their flashlights come on did she take another breath. Scared of the dark? Brian asked with a plainful grin. No, she shook her head. I'm just scared of all the stuff that lives in it. She made her way down the dirty ladder and stepped down onto moist earth. The tunnel was a stretch of darkness in two directions, a ring of stone that seemed to run forever into night. This way, Jacob said, pointing his light along the south tunnel. This should take us right to the Prohibition tunnels, and once we get there, we can find the hidden entrance to this Vermilion guy's passage that he marked on the map. Yeah? Kevin asked, squinting at the map. No offense, dude, but that is a crappy map. Are you sure we're going to be able to find this place? Getting lost in sewer lines just doesn't really sound like much fun. I will get us there, Jacob assured him. It shouldn't take too long. Once we know where it is, we can always come back anytime, right? If you say so, Brian answered from the back of the line. The journey was not all that difficult. It was a straight line after all. They skirted along the lip of a drainage ditch, walking along a narrow stone walk that went on and on toward the south. Another 40 minutes brought them to a short, rickety wooden stairway that turned west and climbed into a higher tunnel. Jacob led them up the stairs, the group pausing at the top while Rachel negotiated the shaky steps. Once they were in a higher tunnel, Jacob pointed his light down to the raw earthen shaft, wood beams supporting its rough shape. This is the offshoot of the Prohibition tunnels, he said. This should take us all the way to the Calvula restaurant, if we followed it that far. But we're looking for a tiny hole somewhere at the floor level. It should be on the right-hand side, so everybody keep your eyes peeled for it. Tiny hole? Brian snorted. Dude, have you seen me? There is no way I'm squeezing through some tiny little hole. Jacob can pull you from one side, Kevin grinned, and I'll put my foot in your butt real gentle-like and shove you in there. You know, 'cause we're such good friends and all. Right, Brian said skeptically. Henry Vermeulen got through it just fine, Jacob said, eyeing the seam where the floor met the wall. He was a big man, a huge man, actually. If he could squeeze through, I'm sure you can. What is it exactly that Henry found down here? Rachel asked, her little light tracing the seam along the wall. I mean, what are we looking for? She shined her light on the back of Jacob's head, other than a hole to shove Brian through. Kevin chuckled and gave her a thumbs up. Jacob grinned over his shoulder, but quickly went back to his search. Henry wrote in his journal that there's an undercity down here, an ancient ruin that proved the existence of some civilization that predated the Cherokee in this area. He called it the Wicked Place. Okay, that's just cool, Kevin said. But if there's a city down here, Rachel said slowly, why hasn't Athens' community tried to study it or preserve it? Or cash in on it as a tourist attraction? Brian added. Good idea, Kevin agreed. But Rachel has a good point. I mean, if it was really down here, don't you think somebody would have found it and profited from it by now? Henry Vermeulen was committed to the Whispering Pine Sanitarium, Jacob told them. He went bat crazy and nobody would listen to him. Wait, Rachel drew to a halt. We're following a map drawn by a man who was committed? I have to agree with what she's sort of saying, Kevin said. Crazy guys are not great navigators. No wonder that map looks so crappy. Henry drew the map before he was committed, Jacob told them, turning to look back at the group. He was perfectly sane when he began his journal. And when he drew his map, he didn't lose his marble until his sister was murdered. Kevin stopped before he got the word out. Can you not throw around words like crazy and murder while we're packed shoulder to shoulder in this creepy, dark, smelly hole, please? His daughters only published parts of his journal, Jacob went on. But what they did publish sounds like it was written by a very smart, very sane, very brave man. And you know this because you don't have a degree in psychology? Rachel asked. I like her, Kevin said, slapping Jacob on the back of the shoulder. Don't you guys just want to see if it's here? Jacob asked. Sure, Kevin shrugged. I mean, we could be all nice and dry and not smelling like century-old poop, sitting in my dad's garage, fighting over the last slice of pizza while Rachel destroys us with her awesome Mando kit. But that's overrated, right? I mean, it's century-old poop, dude. Who can say they have stood on ancient poop? Nobody. Just us. I'm serious, Jacob said. There could be something down here that no one has ever seen before. We could find something down here today that will change everything we know about the people who lived in the area before it was settled. I love that you love old stuff, Brian said, scraping something off the bottom of his shoe. But, Jacob wondered. No buts. It's cool that you like old stuff. But me, I like new stuff nobody's seen before. So I'm with you. Rachel can always kill our character with her super serious murk some other time, Kevin shrugged. Let's go find Crazy Town. They searched that stretch of tunnel for a long while, walking up and down the path again and again. They almost gave up, but it was Jacob who saw it, so well hidden in the dark. Whoa, he said, taking a step back from the stone wall. That is trippy. A unanimous, what? Came from the rest of the group, all turning their lights his way. It's right here, he said, hitting a secret spot with his light. We passed it a dozen times, and it's not even really hidden. It's right here in the open. They converged on the open spot where he stood, murmuring to themselves as they searched for it. Jacob pointed it out with his light, a narrow opening cut into the wall that ran sideways into the existing tunnel wall and vanished into darkness. That looks so weird, Rachel whispered. I mean, you expect it to run straight out, right? Not kind of sideways into the wall like that? No wonder nobody ever found it, Brian nodded. We're all looking for it and we missed it. People who aren't even looking for it are never going to see it. Jacob turned a smile to his friends. Ready to make a discovery, he asked. Ready to change our lives forever? They didn't have to answer. Their expressions made it clear that they were willing to go into that secret tunnel. Jacob went first, turning sideways to fit through. Kevin followed behind him, his tall, slim build an easy fit for the narrow space. Rachel slipped between him and Brian, afraid to be stuck at the rear of the column. Brian turned sideways, following Jacob's method, and found the tunnel snug, but not too tight to get through. Jacob spoke to them as he led the way in the dark. He went slowly, feeling the floor with his boots, testing every step. A fall in the dark could be more than dangerous down here. He kept his light facing always down the tunnel, searching for debris and obstacles. He guided his friends over rocky rises and dips in the earth, until he finally saw an opening at the other end. I see the way out, he told him. It isn't far, just another, 20 feet or so. Brian paused in the dark to take a deep breath and let his back relax. Sucking in his gut was starting to make his back hurt. He relaxed and leaned back against the wall. He lifted his light to casually look over the rock face in front of him. It looked kind of odd, and he frowned at it. This rock looks weird, he spoke up to his friends. Well, like it's covered in old dead vines or something. He reached out to touch it with a fingertip, his frown deepening. What is it? Rachel asked, edging closer to him. I don't know. It feels like a waxy string. Like kite string, sort of, but thicker. It's everywhere. He followed the spread of fibers up the wall and overhead. The crag and the rock ran high to a narrow ceiling far above. There was something up there, more than just vine-like string. Hey guys, Brian called. What is that? They all turned their lights and their eyes up to the ceiling. Rachel recoiled, slamming back against the rock wall as she clamped her hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Kevin spat a startled curse. Jacob stood quietly, brow furrowing over his eyes as he looked up at something shaggy and vaguely human-shaped that swayed gently from strings in the ceiling. It was Brian who panicked. He was the biggest, and there was no stopping him once he set his mind on getting away. He screamed, his voice high-pitched. He plowed into Rachel, crushing her between himself and Kevin. Kevin pulled Rachel to his chest and turned his back to the bigger boy, yelling at him to calm down. Jacob saw that trouble was coming, and he clambered toward the opening at the end of the tunnel. He ducked to the smaller exit, struggling to pull his boot free of the tangle of vines that snared his foot. Kevin spat another filthy curse and set his foot against the edge of the opening, forcing Brian to a temporary halt, just long enough to shove Rachel at the exit. She tripped and fell, letting out a high-pitched shriek as she struck the stone wall on her way down. Jacob snared her hand and dragged her through the hole a split second before screaming Brian shoved Kevin away from him. Kevin fell through the hole and landed hard on his side, instantly cursing. But when he sat up on his hip to yell at him, he noticed dirt and big rocks falling around the larger boy. Kevin and Jacob darted for the opening, each grabbing Brian by the shirt and the arm, jerking him toward the exit. A heavy wad of earth and rock collapsed on top of him, throwing him to the ground and covering him from the thighs down. His screams changed pitch, thick and heavy now with a little pain. There was no time to dig him out. Rock and dirt just kept coming from above. They clung to his arms and threw their body weight away from the closing doorway, dragging him free from the debris that had trapped him. The three of them crashed to the dirt with a clatter of limbs. The echo of thunder dissipated through the cavern, the last of the rock and earth tumbling over the collapsed tunnel. Kevin rubbed his forehead and sat in a crouch by Brian's side. He pinched his dark eyes shut and ran his hands over his short-cropped hair. He was slim, almost scrawny, draped in a green plaid shirt over a black t-shirt. He'd lost his ball cap in the cave-in and kept running his hands over his scalp. Brian sat beside him, rocking on his backside, cursing while he held his shin with both hands. A dark stain was spreading under the denim in his grasp. His light gray t-shirt was smudged with damp earth, and he'd lost a shoe. He was somewhere under all that dirt and rock, along with Kevin's hat. "Son of a goat!" he ground his teeth. "Man, that hurt." "Hurt?" Kevin seethed. "You almost got us killed. What was that about?" "Didn't you see that thing?" Brian asked. "It wasn't normal." "Normal?" Kevin sighed. "We're in a cave. There's shadows and weird sounds and all kinds of creepy crawly things down here, and you panic, almost get us killed because you saw something not normal?" "He's right," Rachel said quietly. "It wasn't normal." She paced back and forth, talking to herself quietly, shifting her little purple backpack with every turn. Her sleek bun had started to come unraveled, and her glasses were coated with a fine spray of damp earth. Her boot-cut jeans were caked in mud, her pink tennis shoes were filthy, her yellow Star Wars t-shirt was smeared with dirt, and a streak of mud discolored her jaw. "It was nothing," Kevin tried to assure them. "Just old wires and trash from rising rainwater. Relax." Jacob said nothing, only turned toward the dark, casting a faraway stare into the depths of the gaping cave that sprawled out in front of them. He felt sweat run over his bald head. Shaved for the summer heat and long weeks of working with the cattle, he balled his hands into fists at his sides, gathering his baggy jeans between his fingers. He ignored the itch of a slow trickle of blood oozing from his nose that dripped to the front of his black t-shirt. "Turns out this was a stupid idea," Rachel said with a tight voice. "If only someone had told us—" "Oh, wait, I did." "You're not helping," Brian said through clenched teeth. "You were right. We shouldn't have come down here." He pursed his lips, looking around expectantly. "Oh, look. Admitting that you were right has not helped us. So shut up!" His voice echoed through the dark. Kevin gave him a hard shove, knocking him onto his side. "We need to focus on finding a way out," Jacob said quietly, his eyes still on the dark stretch of cave ahead of them. "And it isn't the way we came in. We're going to have to go deeper to try to find another way." "Oh, no," Rachel shook her head. "I'd rather dig my way out of here with a toothpick than go in any further." "You can't stay here, Rachel," he told her, dragging his stare from the dark. "It won't help us. Brian needs a doctor. Maybe. If we sit and wait, things could get really bad for him." "You mean worse than almost losing a leg in a cave-in?" she sneered. "Worse than being trapped in a tunnel that nobody knows exists? 'Cause that's pretty bad, Jacob." He stared at her for a long second, wondering what it was about her that ever made him like her. "Why did you have to bring us down here anyway?" she asked, fear breaking her voice. "Why couldn't we just game, like we planned?" Fear wet her eyes, and he felt his anger toward her melt away. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I didn't mean." "Don't apologize to her," Brian said, eyes narrowing with distaste. "Nobody made her come down here." "Oh, get bent," Rachel snapped. Kevin blew out a sigh and turned his dark eyes her way. Sitting here arguing won't help any of us. Rachel, shine your light over here so I can see Brian's leg. She hesitated, anger flattening her mouth into a shapeless line. Kevin resisted the urge to call her a name and tell her to get her butt over there. Please, he said instead. She gave no response, only moved closer, shining her light at Brian's shins. She kept her eyes on the shadows, not interested in seeing what might be under Brian's pant leg. Kevin peeled the denim back slowly, frowning at the fabric that clung to his friend's leg. He saw no blood, just matted black leg hair until he reached the knee. There wasn't much blood. Most of it had soaked into the denim. There was only an angry patch of skin and a slow ooze of blood. Kevin let out a hard sigh and sank lower in his crouch. Are you kidding me? He leveled Brian with an unsympathetic stare. It's just a scrape. Broken skin. It probably won't even scar. He jerked the pant leg back down where it belonged and rose to his feet. Get up, princess. You'll be fine. What? Brian looked confused. Dude, it really hurts. I can believe it hurts, Kevin said, crossing his arms over his chest. I don't believe you were screaming like a girl over a scraped knee. I was being buried alive. From the knees down, Kevin droned. It'd take you 100 years to die like that. Get up. Okay, guys, that's enough, Jacob said. Brian's okay, so we can calm down and try to be smart about this. I'm just going to go see if I can get a call out to Melanie, and she can get the cops down here, the fire department, and we'll be fine. Kevin continued to sneer at Brian for a long moment, and Rachel rocked gently as she held herself. Jacob dug his iPhone 3 out of his pocket and unlocked it with a slide of a finger. He attempted to call Melanie first, but could get no signal. He opened a new text to his sister and typed a brief message. Need help, sis. Went looking for a wicked place. Brian is hurt, but okay for now. Trapped in the tunnel under the city. The wicked place. Cave in. Please send help. He tapped the send button, but there was no signal at all. He heaved a sigh and slid the phone back into his pocket. No signal down here, he said quietly. If we ever hit a spot where we can get a little service, that message will send. What? Rachel asked, her voice thin. No, I don't want to stay here. We don't have much choice, Jacob told her. The message won't get out unless we find a signal. I think we should keep moving till we find a spot, and we can't be that deep under the city streets. I mean, we're not that far from the prohibition tunnels. Kevin agreed with a nod and dusted himself off, ready to follow Jacob's lead. Rachel shook her head and backed away from the group. No, she sobbed. No, we shouldn't move. They'll find us if we just stay here. We're not lost in the woods, Rachel, Kevin pointed out. We're underground. The rules are different here. Like you're a caving expert. Spelunking, I believe it's called, he said with a raised brow. And I've had some experience in the Scouts and with my cousin. He's an EMT who does recovery in caves, so I do know a little about this. We can't get help from right here, Jacob told her gently. We need to let people know we're in trouble, and we need a cell signal for that. We're not far underground, so we should hit a signal soon. We have light, Kevin said. With light, we can move safely, but we gotta take it slow. Rachel cried quietly for a moment. She was afraid. They all were. We can't stay here, Jacob said in a moment. We can get help, but only if we move on. We need to try to find a signal or a way out. Anything on Mr. Crazy's map? Kevin wondered, brushing himself off. Anything that looks like another way out? Jacob pulled the wrinkled book from his back pocket, shaking his head as he looked over the map. No way out on here, he said. Just a diagram that shows the way to the ruins. I'm not sure that helps us, Kevin said. But we already know that there's another way in from the prohibition tunnels. Not so strange to think there might be another way in. I mean, it's a cave, right? Cave's gotta come out on the surface somewhere. Yeah, Jacob nodded. Whoever lived down here had to have a way to come and go before those tunnels were built. There's another way. We just have to find it, that's all. That could be miles away, Rachel said, her voice thin with anxiety. It could even be underwater or buried under a building. You know, like the Walmart cave? They poured concrete in it for 3 days and never found the bottom, so they just built the store right on top of it. You are real hard on hope. You know that, Kevin said. We'll never get that tunnel dug out, Jacob told them, nodding toward the collapsed crag in the rock. I think we should go on. We can follow Henry's map to the ruins and try to find another way out. It was a city, so there has to be a way for whoever lived there to come and go from the surface. Come on, princess, Kevin said, kicking Brian in the butt. If you don't think that leg's gonna fall off, we should get started. Batteries won't last forever. He clicked his light off and then on. How can you be so calm about this? Rachel asked Kevin as he brushed by her. Want to stop right here and cry? He asked. Maybe pull your hair out, scream, beg for people to help you, people who aren't here. You can sit down right where you are and worry about what's going to happen to us. But none of those things are going to change the predicament you're in right now. So why not try something a little more likely to do us some good and take an active role in your own survival here, huh? He didn't mean to sound so harsh, but the truth was that he was just as scared as she was. He just had the sense to know that there was no help for them in that spot. Look, he said more gently, you're a smart gamer. I've seen you think your way through tougher problems than this. Just calm down and use your head. This isn't a game, she snapped. Think about it. You find yourself trapped in a cave. You've lost your weapons, and all you have is a torch and an incomplete map of the cave system. You don't know where you are, but you know that if you stay, you'll die. What do? It was a gaming scenario. Once she'd thought her way through more than once at a gaming table. Take inventory of my assets, she said, pinching her eyes shut, trying to imagine that this was just a game she could win if she was smart. Follow the map toward the most likely point of escape. See? Kevin said with a nod. Just like gaming. Keep your cool. We'll be fine. Brian climbed to his feet and limped along behind them all. They followed Jacob across a broad stretch of open cavern, the cave floor covered in a sand-like earth of fine dirt. The ceiling was low at first, but as they followed the smooth path into a lower section of the cave, they found the ceiling climbed higher until it was shrouded in total darkness. Hey guys, Brian asked after a short while. What do you think that was back there? I mean, it wasn't human. Pretty much everything on this planet other than humans isn't human, Brian, Kevin pointed out. No, I mean it looked human. Humanish. But it wasn't, you know? Garbage hung up in wires and vines, Kevin said. There's nothing down here but dirt and water and vermin. No, there's not, Rachel spoke up. Kevin stopped and turned to look down at her with a raised brow. What? There's no vermin, she said. No bugs, no rats, nothing alive. Kevin scoffed at her, turning around to throw his light in a circle. He expected beetles and centipedes and rats to scurry away from the beam, but there was no movement. He saw only empty beetle shells, tiny little skulls and scattered bones no bigger than toothpicks half buried in the fine dirt. There had been vermin here once, but there was nothing alive hiding in the dark anymore. Well, that's a little weird, he said to himself. It's not weird, Rachel said. It's bad. Animals know when a place isn't right, and if there aren't any animals here, then we shouldn't be here either. Hence our trying to not be here any longer than we have to be, Kevin reminded her. Tell me something, Jacob. What are we looking for? Like rubble or chimneys and doorways? What? Henry said it was a small village, Jacob told him, glancing down at the book. Just a few huts, 4 or 5 of them, I think. He said they were still standing when he found the place. Just a few huts in this ring of black trees. Trees, Kevin nodded. But in a cave. Not normal trees, Jacob said. Well, obviously, Kevin agreed. Who used to live there? Brian asked from the back of the line. Well, Henry's daughters didn't publish his entire journal, just parts of it. Plus, I haven't read the whole book yet. But what I have read about Henry's visit down here says that he and his archaeologist friend went through the village, and they said it must have belonged to outcasts from another village. People who weren't accepted among the rest of normal people. Not normal outcasts, Kevin chuckled. Living in a cave in a ring of not normal trees. What a lovely place we're traveling to. That just makes it more interesting, Jacob told him. Social outcasts from the past, and we get to see how they lived. Not sure I'd call this living, Brian muttered from the back of the line. Modern society thinks of caves as dirty, scary places where monsters hide, Jacob pointed out, leading his friends into a tighter pathway between snug walls. But more primitive cultures viewed caves as magical places, gateways to other worlds, even the realm of the gods. So the normal people get to live in the nice, pretty green world up top, Kevin said, and the outcasts get to live closer to the gods. How's that fair? Jacob paused at the end of a narrow path, looking down at the map. The cavern opened up here, and there were infinite directions they could have gone. Not all gods are nice, he said with a shrug. It's this way. He led them off toward a lower path, going deeper into the earth. It's a little creepy that you can say that so casually, Kevin pointed out. Previous to Christianity, there wasn't really a concept of a purely good or evil god, he told them. All gods were capable of good and evil. I mean, look at Ahura Mazda. He was a good god, but his own shadow was the source of evil. Duality is the true nature of nearly every primitive religion. I take it back, Brian said. I am no longer loving your love of old stuff. You are officially creepy. What's that? Rachel asked, speaking for the first time in a long time. What's what? Kevin asked, squinting into the dark as he panned his light. There, Rachel said, pointing her light to a low spot in the path down below. It looks like a gate. They all put their lights on the same spot and stared for a long moment. Looks like a gate, Kevin agreed. This must be the place Henry was talking about when he wrote, he paused to flip a few pages. The doorway to the other world was strangely mundane in its construction, he read. So we're in the right place? Brian asked. Not yet, Jacob shook his head. But we are headed the right way. It really shouldn't be much farther. He said he passed through the gate and climbed a hill, and he found a village settled in a low gorge. So the greatest discovery of our time's just on the other side of that rise, Kevin said. Rachel stood quietly, her eyes fixed on the gate. She hugged her flashlight to her chest, her other hand over her mouth, as if she meant to keep herself quiet. Didn't I read this story? She said quietly, her words muffled behind her hand. What? Kevin asked, turning to squint at her. I've read this story, she said a little more loudly. Lovecraft wrote it. About a city under the earth? Lovecraft wrote a lot of stories about terrible things, Kevin pointed out. But that story was called Rats in the Walls, I think. And that city was huge. We're looking for a tiny village with no rats at all. Totally different story. They made their way down the winding path, picking a careful course through loose dirt and rocks. When they came to the gate, they found it twisted on its frame, lying at a crooked angle against the rocks that acted as its anchor. It was oddly fashioned from old wood, its surface slick with a growth of moss. Mushrooms grew from the highest corner of the twisted gate, bone-white and vaguely translucent in the light. They slipped through the gateway and made the climb up the other side. The path wasn't easy to climb. It was slick red clay littered with fragile limestone that broke away under their hands and feet. Before they reached the top, they were muddy, bleeding from cuts on the rocks and soaked with sweat. Finally, they arrived at the top, sucking down ragged breaths, clenching aching fingers. They stood shoulder to shoulder at the apex of the hill, staring down into the hollow below. Oh my God, Rachel whispered. Ellen Mullen woke in the night, the glow of a light somewhere in the house sufficient to drag her from sleep. She slid into her flip-flops and descended the stairs, following the light to the kitchen below. She smelled tea brewing and leftover lasagna warming. The hum of the microwave carried through the hallway, making her frown. Her sister Lucy only ate leftovers when she was troubled. "What's eating you?" she asked, propping up against the doorway. Lucy didn't answer right away, only dumped 2 cups of white sugar into a pitcher of hot tea and began to stir it. "Bad dream," she said, shuffling around a cat to fill her glass with ice. "One night of leftovers bad?" she asked. "Or we'll be eating chocolate cake for every meal for the rest of the week kinda bad?" Lucy stopped what she was doing. She leaned heavily onto the counter, looking down at the floor while she sucked down a thick breath. "William Wells, kinda bad," she whispered. Ellen felt goose flesh creep up all over her body. She couldn't help but look over her shoulder, a sudden pang of deep fear in her guts. "Good God, Lucy," she said, pulling her housecoat tighter around herself. "Why in the world would you ever mention that horrible mess? It was just a dream." But Lucy turned, pinning her with a dark, wet stare. Her face was haunted, and Ellen shuddered because she recognized the look in her sister's eye. "I dreamed it," Lucy said. "Just like that first morning." "Lucy," Ellen begged her, "stop." "I heard it, Ellen. I heard it in my dreams, and when I woke up, I heard it at the door, just like when we was little girls." Ellen cast a cautious glance toward the front door. She swallowed hard and toyed with a button at her collar. "Something's wrong," Lucy insisted. "Something bad." "Daddy would roll over in his grave if he knew you were talking about this," Ellen warned. "Daddy doesn't have a grave," Lucy reminded her, "and he ain't here to worry about it. It's our mess to deal with. Always was." "He didn't dump it on us, Lucy." "He did," Lucy said. "He didn't mean to. God knows he didn't, but that's just the way it happened anyway." "I haven't had any dreams like that," Ellen offered with a reassuring smile. "Maybe it's just a meaningless dream. You have been around that bookshop a lot lately. Could just be residue coming off that poor Julia Gray woman." Lucy shifted her stare to her sister's face. "Maybe," she nodded. "Poor little thing, she's oozing aura. Hadn't got a clue what's going on." "She'll figure it out," Ellen said. "Just part awaken." "We can help her," Lucy said. "Nothing wrong with that, is there?" "If that's what you want," Ellen nodded. "But not tonight. It is time for bed." Lucy turned back to the microwave, watching the numbers count backward from 8 seconds. When the alarm beeped and the light went out inside the machine, she stood quietly, staring into the dark interior. "I want to help her," she said, "but I don't think that's what I'm feeling. I think it's something else. I think it's him." "Him?" Ellen wondered. "I know you're not talking about the him we promised we'd never mention again." Lucy turned to look at her, the lasagna in the microwave now forgotten. "We knew when we did it he wasn't dead," she said. We knew even when we heard him screaming inside that burning building, we'd never be rid of him." "Nonsense," Ellen scowled. "He's gone, Lucy. Burned up in that fire with every other poor tortured soul trapped inside. Let it be. We can't undo it. Besides all that, it needed doing anyway." "I hadn't thought about him in more than... well, it's been a real long time," Lucy said with a shake of her head. "Why now? Why am I dreaming of him now all of a sudden? And why am I hearing that beetle at the door?" "No more about that bug," Ellen snapped. "I hadn't heard a thing." "You haven't?" Lucy wondered. "You hadn't heard it tapping at the front door and under the hall stairs? 'Cause I have. And I know you know what it sounds like as well as I do. That's one thing Mama gave us before she died, Ellen. Ears for things that walk on the fringes." Ellen pinched her eyes shut and took a few deep breaths. "I don't like that part of the world," she said, "and you know it. Just leave it alone. Life on this side's good for us, ain't it? Why would we risk what we have?" "You know why," Lucy said firmly. "Because if we don't listen to the messengers, we won't know what they're saying about him, or what they're telling him about us. You know what he'll do if he ever gets out. He'll find us. He's got a score to settle with you and me." Ellen thought she heard a faint scratch at the front door. She started to turn her head to look at it, but stopped herself, clenching her eyes shut again. She was spooked, that was all. It wasn't really happening. It was just the old porch, settling in the humid night. Hello, my lovelies. This is Sinister Sibylline. I hope you enjoyed the first 3 chapters of my story called String. I wrote this story back in July of 2014. Since that time, the setting has grown, and many new characters and their own tales have sprung from it. I look forward to bringing you all of those stories and more in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead. You can find me on Facebook as Sinister Sibylline, where I will post tidbits about the settings I write in, including characters, plot concepts, and further works. I will answer questions you may have, and even share some of my artwork. I hope to see you there. If you enjoyed the first 3 chapters of String, I encourage you to like this video, share it, and maybe even subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of my upcoming tales. I will upload the next 3 chapters on Saturday, November 7th, so come back and see where this story goes. Thank you so much for your time and your support. I wish you all a very happy Halloween.